I was linking it back to the strategic direction. So the language that Kainga Ora used versus the language that I think I landed with in the report was working on what they've requested, but trying to bring in the strategic wording from the strategic direction objective. So the planned character of each zone, I would expect to go to the zones to look for that, what's expected in that zone. I don't know if there was an expectation that should be in the subdivision chapter.
Yeah. I mean, it's a I guess there's 2 points out of that. One, it's what's planned by the zone rather than what's planned by the overlay. So there's a potential sort of lacuna there, and that was a point I sort of raised. The other is that sort of specificity, because I know where the term is used in my neck of the woods, what invariably happens is that you then get lots of planners dissecting the subsequent rules and provisions to crystal ball gaze about what the neighbourhood is intended to look like by reference to the minimum lot size and the bulk and location standards. and it can be quite a fraught and contested exercise as to what is the actual planned outcome, because of that very factor. There's a multiplicity of outcomes. Do you foresee that that's going to be a problem here? Or to put it another way, if you're going to incorporate this concept, do we think we want to be a little bit more explicit about what it is we're expecting to see in these zones?
Yes, I think it does need to be a bit more explicit. So we just had that example of the rural lifestyle zone that I've read out, and it could be more explicit.
Yeah. I don't want this to be one of those butterfly wing effect issues, though, where inserting one word requires or leads to consequential changes throughout the document. We don't want to see that. But I mean, I'd always understood it in the context that if you've got a zone, and I guess the Auckland context is an example one, so much of the isthmus in Auckland was upzoned through the unitary plan, and traditional neighbourhoods that had their 500 square metres or even down to 400 square metres were all upzoned, for example, to terraced housing and apartment zoning. And so the use of the planned character construct was to signal to those existing residents in those locations that they ought to expect change, that what they were seeing next door was not going to be there forever. And I don't know, and I can see why Kainga Ora would suggest that that's real here, because there is an aspiration, particularly within the existing urban area, to try and get some speed up with infill and a little bit more intensity. You can see why they'd want to incorporate that concept, but I wonder whether it's appropriate or not now in reflection. I mean, do you have a view on that? I mean, do you think there's going to be a significant pushback to the changing of the lot sizes in the residential communities?
Sorry, pushback on the lot sizes. Can you just?
Yeah, I mean, do you foresee a lot of people saying, "Oh my goodness, the lot sizes now, there's so much more intensive development, and I'm going to try and rely on the existing amenity that I've got to try and oppose that development." Do you foresee something like that happening in New Plymouth?
Has it been happening? I know that there's certainly intensification going up our street, and in the case of non-compliant subdivision, and when I see them come through the council, they've got all the neighbours' approval. They're not pushing back on it, and there's a lots down at 300 in a 450 square zone,
which is a non-complying activity, presumably.
And they've all sailed through the process.
Okay, I'll look up. I might.
I just want to.
Sorry, Nicola.
Sorry, I just want to apply that to the rural zone just for a minute too, because we've got people that want to do small lot subdivision in the rural zone because they've got other small lots around them. So, I mean, with that planned character where we want to keep that open space over predominant character where where we've got all these small lots around us. But I guess we don't want people saying, my neighbour's done it, so I can do it. I guess.
Well, but I mean, in that example, they can, if they can do it as a controlled activity. So there's no, I mean, the existing character is almost irrelevant in that scenario. I suppose what you're suggesting is that people will come in and try for an extra couple of lots based on what their neighbour's done, and it would be non-complying, presumably.
Yes, and we had that example of parent title.
Yeah. There are, I mean, coming again to the rural zones, and you heard the discussion with Sarah, there are other aspirations for outcomes of the rural zones as well, also signalled in the strategic directions, i.e. that the natural features will be protected, maintained, restored and enhanced, that sites of significance to Māori will be protected, all of those sorts of things. Would you agree that those are also planned outcomes for land in the rural zones in New Plymouth?
If they're contained in objectives and policies in those overlay zones, then I expect that they would be outcomes, and possibly don't need to be duplicated in the zone because they are there and they are cross-referenced.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, thank you for that. That was helpful.
Just a supplementary on that, didn't we end up with the term planned character in one of the strategic objectives?
Yeah.
What we've indicated, bearing in mind that it is really just interim guidance, what we've suggested, Stephen, is I think we changed it slightly. The district develops and changes over time in a cohesive, compact and structured way. And then I think we currently suggesting work in progress and a number 10, which in a way that may detract from amenity values appreciated by existing communities, but improve such values for new communities by providing access and varied housing densities and types. And it was very much leveraged out of the NPS on urban development and the phraseology that it was using, rather than a broader proposition around objectives and policies and how they need to be implemented throughout all of the zones.
Yes.
But it wasn't the phrase planned character or planned outcomes. It was just acknowledging that the world will change and that change ought not to be seen as an adverse effect in its own right.
Yeah, no, I recall us deliberating about that, and part of this only interim, but it'd be useful someone to do a control F on the term planned character.
It was D19 in an urban environment though.
Yes.
That was planned character.
Oh yeah, it is too. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, planned character.
And that was the reason for changing. I can't remember what exactly what time for it.
Yeah.
So,
So
okay.
the old boys, memory's not too bad after all, but yeah, okay, thank you. And look, I also, that just verbal summaries is excellent. Like I've made some notes as well. I don't think there's any gaps in terms of where you're heading in terms of either the things we've asked for, Nicola, or for the matters still in contention. I presume we'll hear from Lauren about the Kainora legal position. So yeah, thank you very much. And I just actually wrote a note about something you said about it being an enjoyable hearing or part of an enjoyable hearing. I've found these last 2 days pretty interesting. Enjoyable, yeah. Yeah. I think it's made up by the just the character and quality of the people we're talking to and the way they put the evidence together.
It's probably a good time to pass the mantle or planning gig, to my left.
Possibly not. I was gonna follow up by saying, if we're saying a subdivision hearing has been enjoyable for 2 days in New Plymouth, either it's a sad indictment on all of us, or it means that it's a recognition of how relevant and important the subdivision chapter is amongst the plan and planning as a whole.
Let's go with the latter.
I'll go with the latter, but that's just just the way things go. When I actually saw the subdivision chapter, I was thinking I might be able to pass it on to someone else. I'm pleased to have hung in there with our planning geeks.
A
So
very
thank-
different experience from hearing 4, which we had completely on Zoom. Sorry to those who are still on Zoom, but I enjoyed that too, but this has been very, very different.
Yes, and I think I mentioned to Julie that right at the start when I talked about the hybrid Zoom, sorry, Kit, you do gain a lot from just being in the room, and certainly having, particularly in our role as commissioners, we're doing our best, obviously, but it's just the body language and the nuance and the sense of the room that you pick up. You know, I look around and see Ms. Marsh nodding, shaking her head about something that she knows, and immediately be able to go, yes, just update us on that. So, look, it has been a really good hearing. Thank you for that. And Nicola, you don't have any areas that you're happy to take the 2 weeks in terms of formal reporting back?
I think so. We would.
Yes, that's it.
I don't see why I would need any longer, just that in case I needed to wait to get information that we would come in.
Okay, just let us know if that's if there's going to be a problem. And no other further conferencing with planners, everything's clear enough for you?
It is. Just if I want to make amendments to sub R6 or sub R6 new or sub R6X or whatever you want to call it, is it okay to conference on the wording of that?
Yes, certainly the procedures encourage they to do that. And so just you to organise that with the relevant experts. Very happy for you to do that. Make sure it's recorded in a witness conferencing note or something in your reply. But that's if you like to do that, that's going to be helpful. Go for your life. Right. Lucky last.
Yeah,
Yes.
last but not least.
Yes.
How about that?
How about that?
Look, it's late in the day, so I don't intend to labour any of these points. I will just, the focus of my reply is really just in respect of Mr. Matheson's submissions and the legal points that he raised, and then I'll just touch on a couple of other matters that have been discussed today, primarily because I've found them pretty interesting and want to stick my beak into them. So the first point that I want to note is that Kāinga Ora at the outset indicated that it doesn't have any issue with the infrastructure standards. This first part of what I'm going to talk about is in respect of the infrastructure standards, and that it's entirely appropriate to refer to design guides in the policies and as assessment criteria. So I think as a starting point, we note that. But their issue, as I understand it, is the role that the standards and the design guides play in the consent process. The reference to the process in Schedule 1, Clause 34 for consultation on the proposal has already been referred to by Nicola and confirmed that that process was followed. So I don't think that there's any shadow that needs to be cast on that.
Was that a Schedule 1 notification?
It's under Clause 34 of
Okay.
Schedule 1.
So it wasn't a local government consultation, it was a...
No, you just you notify it prior to the notification of the PDP.
Okay.
I also note in that clause that it does provide that a failure to comply with that process does not invalidate a plan which incorporates material by reference. So even though they have done it correctly, it wouldn't invalidate it if they hadn't. By the by. Mr. Matheson noted that the infrastructure standard are replete with references to other documents that might change from time to time. And I've had a quick scroll through the standards. Look, they do refer to various other standards. You know, the pipe construction installation refers to an NZS standard. water mains refer to a NZS standard. These are just examples. Access to manholes, again, refers to an NZS standard. So yes, within that document, there are references to other standards, but I don't think that there's anything unusual about that. And I would submit, so the point that he made was that if those standards change, then what happens? And I would submit that it's a reasonably common and well understood process under clause 31 of Schedule 1. So you can only amend, those amendments would only be brought into the PDP if the PDP is amended to reflect those amendments. Otherwise, you refer to the version which was in existence at the time that the plan was notified. He also noted that inclusion of the standard makes the plan look succinct, but then requires users to trawl through hundreds of pages. I mean, I guess I just note that that's exactly the function of clause 30 of Schedule 1 of the RMA. So where written material deals with technical matters that's too large or impractical to include in a district plan, then the process is to incorporate it by reference, and that's what's been done here. So with respect to his substantive submission that the reference to the standard should be deleted in its entirety, my instructions are that the council is not supportive of this. The standard itself has been in use in the district and indeed our entire Taranaki region for a number of years and is well understood by the development community here. It's noted as well that the infrastructure standard is referred to as a permitted activity standard at various points in the South Taranaki district plan, which was made operative following Environment Court appeals earlier this year.
Was that matter particularly in front of the court?
I haven't had an opportunity to check that.
There's a difference between
Absolutely.
having had appeals on a plan and this
Absolutely.
particular, yes. If you could just check on that.
Yeah, but I expect that, and I haven't had a chance to confirm this either, that the inclusion of it in the PDP in the way that it has been was in part to help achieve region-wide consistency. There is a drive here to do that amongst our Taranaki councils. So yeah, we can have a look at that.
Lauren, sorry, it's, I can't actually see you. The camera's in a different direction. I'm staring at a table, but just on the point you just made, how is the standard presently used in the operative district plan? Is it used as referred to as a matter of control or as a standard for an activity status or anything like that?
In the South Taranaki operative plan?
No, in the current, I mean, in the operative district plan, because you said it's been in use in New Plymouth for a number of years, and I just wanted to get a sense of how it's being used in the current district plan.
So it's referenced in the appendix of the appendices to the plan in the subdivision and transport, traffic and transport appendix. It isn't currently a activity standard or a performance criteria. I think that's what they call in the operative plan, isn't it? It is a note in the requirements for when you're, seeking consent for various transport or subdivision issues that compliance with that standard is needed.
Okay, thank you. Just a comment in relation to leaving consideration of engineering matters until after consent's been granted, or indeed at the section 223, 224 stage. Council's position is that this hasn't and won't result in optimal integrated outcomes. Considering the infrastructure standard in the design phase of developments,
ensures that developers aren't left with surprises at the end of the process, which in some cases, if they haven't planned for that at the outset, can cause, you know, fairly cost prohibitive changes, and a lot of frustration and inefficiency. So the council, as Ms. Lawrence indicated, has been working really hard to try and front load that aspect of development so that developers can incorporate that, you know, those designs at the very beginning of the design process.
That the issue isn't so much that, though. I suppose it's not about, well, not necessarily jettisoning the standard in total, as the original relief of Karangaroa was. It's more of the alternate relief of having it on the table, but not as a standard, but as a matter of control or discretion, which would enable the council to consider those matters, formulate conditions that require engineering plan approvals or certain things to happen as part of the subdivision, giving effect to the subdivision consent, so that section 223 can then be approved, certified, whatever the term is.
Absolutely, and I understand that point, and you know, with all of that I've just been, you know, that I've just said, Mr. Matheson's point that there are aspects of the standard that are not appropriate as a district plan standard. Yeah, I accept some of those points, and that going through that standard does indicate that there are various aspects of it that reserve a discretion to the council.
Yes. So what you could do is, and I know some councils have done this, they've gone through the standard and grey shaded those aspects that are mandatory.
Yes.
And the rule, Nelson City operative plan, and it was a recent plan change, did that, and they become quasi standards in the plan, and the rest are not standards for the purpose of the plan. So that's one way of doing it. Whether that's the most effective and efficient way of doing it is the issue, I guess.
Yes.
The other way is to not to try and do that and just have standard as a matter of control or discretion that would enable conditions to be formulated.
I think ultimately it may be that a hybrid of all of those, excluding obviously the actual activity or effect standard option.
Yes.
We may end up with something along those lines, but council's keen to take this opportunity to actually have a close look at that standard.
Okay.
To ascertain
What
whether it can grey out some areas, or whether, you know, just an advice note's appropriate, or whether we just incorporate it as matters of discretion.
What I can say to that is the question I would put to Ms. Morrison then is, what is the most appropriate method?
Yes.
And so I guess I'm just signalling that's the test.
To achieve the objectives of the plan.
Yes.
Yeah.
In terms of effectiveness and efficiency. I don't think we're dealing with a risk issue here as such, not a major risk anyway. There's nothing unknown as such.
Yeah.
So we don't need to go into a full cost benefit analysis, but it's appropriateness is the test. Sorry, I've interrupted.
No, that's fine. I mean, that was all I wanted to say at the current time about the infrastructure standard. So I'm happy to take any other questions on that, or just carry on with the other issues that I wanted to touch on.
Look, I think I should clarify my open door. Look, this is based on bidder experience in other jurisdictions. I don't know quite how to say this. Old-fashioned engineering views, slavishly enforced, has led to some new stifling of innovation, other views being able to be brought to bear in terms of modern issues, and even some of the types of solutions that we're hearing from Tangata Whenua. Just impossible to be
Reconcile.
reconciled, or even on the table, even brought to the table.
Mm.
And that is where I, just through literally bitter experience, have concerns about particularly discretionary standards where it's the same, it's a classic conditions issue where councils for years and years and years have these terrible conditions that says, you know, you should prepare a traffic management plan for the approval of the district engineer, full stop.
And that it's accompanied by, well, this is what we've been doing for years. These are our standard conditions. So how dare you try and alter them?
Yeah, so that's the context. I think we've moved way past that. I'm sure New Plymouth is, I've never processed any consents in New Plymouth while only while he's been as a decision maker. But that's the reason for my comment when Val was particularly pointing out the wide discretions and some of the uncertainties. You know, standard is a standard. It's got to be enforceable. It's got to be clear. It's got to have the right purpose. Those sorts of things. So thinking about, I think if you thought about the elements of the standard with the Newbury principles hat on as you were analysing that. And yeah, Newbury principles, for those that are interested, it's an old English case where a lord over there talked about what reasonable conditions on development would be, and they had to be clear and concise and fit for purpose and not for any ulterior motive and those sorts of things. And it was really a wise decision that's been adapted into our planning practice. So just for feedback, that's, you know, I think you said you're going to be thinking about those matters in those documents.
Absolutely, and those points are accepted, and I've acted for developers around the country as well, and I'm familiar with the experience that you're describing, so no issue there. I guess as well, you know, things are moving very quickly at the moment in the regulatory space. Yes. And I think it's timely to put a lens on that infrastructure standard. Possibly speaking out of turn here, but you know, with all of the new climate change initiatives, you know, whether that standard will actually enable council to be nimble and react to those things as well, is something we should, you know, we need to.
Yeah, but with the kind of submission, you've got a pretty open,
exactly, yeah,
open ability to reflect on that. And you know, the way these processes happen is that when something like this comes up, you do have a bit of time to reflect and think about things and apply rigor off what we're talking about. Yeah, good things can happen. So,
Wallace, were you going to comment on the subdivision design guide also from a legal aspect? It's the same but quite different in a sense because it's been through as part of the plan to start with. I think the only issue that I think we were getting tripped up with was it applicable on a controlled activity status. That was the key one, and if it wasn't really signaling that controlled activity should be something greater than a controlled activity. But given that the expectation is that with controlled activity it will be approved, and if you meet the bulk location standards.
Yeah, look, I found that discussion pretty fascinating. I particularly liked Mr. Littlejohn's description of the applicant holding all the power in relation to controlled activities and the council holding the power in relation to restricted discretionary activities. I would like the opportunity to reflect on those matters of control with the planning team. I think, as you rightly pointed out, you know, there is a tension between the need to provide the least restrictive regime, which is what that controlled activity status is about, but not doing, you know, we need to be careful that it's not disguised a controlled activity you know, in a restricted
I
discretionary.
guess that
code.
works in reverse, doesn't it?
Yes,
Yes.
yes. So, yeah, look, I'd like to give that a bit more thought.
That's right.
I think there were some valid points made around that.
All right, so you've got some other things to touch on?
There was a point made around the interplay between overlay rules and subdivision rules and how that would work if one was controlled and one. I may have not quite grasped the point that was being made, but certainly there is that direction in the introduction part of the plan around bundling. And so where, as I understand the law at the moment, where two activities do interplay, it is possible to bundle. So for an activity, for instance, which infringed the natural hazards subdivision rule and also a subdivision rule in the subdivision chapter, whichever held the most restrictive activity status could be applied. So that's how I understand those interplaying, but there may have been a different nuance to the question that I missed.
I think so.
So Kat, that was your question, was it?
Yeah, I was. I think you've hit the nail on the head, Lauren. I was forgetting that there is a general rule which says that if you've got multiple consents that you need, then the most stringent activity status applies to the whole proposal. So I've always had a problem with a proposal where, and it usually happened where there was a regional plan, for example, and a district plan, and you were controlled under the district plan, but you needed a discretionary regional consent, and you'd be bundled across plans like that. But we don't have that situation here. That general rule effectively deems the controlled activity in the subdivision chapter to be a restricted discretionary activity if it happens to have one of the overlay features on it. So we don't run into competing activity statuses where one of them's controlled. You effectively, the status changes as a consequence of the other overlay rule. So I got on a bit of a tiz, but then I worked myself out of it. So thanks.
And Ms. Lawrence's table will show us what that change is for.
Yeah.
Yes.
Overlay.
I mean, I think, case law doesn't override the Act, and so the bundling principles come from case law. But I think the plan says, where bundling is appropriate. So if you do have two separate activities that are so distinct that that the bundling principle shouldn't apply, you would still treat them separately. But for a subdivision, which is tripping multiple rules, I would think it would be difficult to say that they weren't interrelated. And then, just touching on that last discussion you had with Ms. Lawrence around the planned outcome for each zone and the submission from Maria at the end. And in her written submission, she indicated that she felt that there was a policy gap because the plan doesn't clearly articulate what the planned outcomes or character for each zone is. I just note that in a similar way to the Auckland Unitary Plan, which includes zone descriptors within each zone, and the objectives of each of the zones in this plan, there is a reference to the zone's intended function and its intended uses and its predominant character. So there's an attempt to describe those things in the objectives. And then the policies in each zone manage activities and control effects depending on that intended outcome. So I'd caution the panel on proceeding as if there's a policy gap, but I accept that the words planned outcomes may have unintended consequences if the planned outcome is not actually explicit in the zone. And obviously the plan wasn't drafted with those words in mind, or an appreciation that people might be looking specifically for that. And so, as Mr. Littlejohn foreshadowed, the unintended consequences may be that leads to endless debates, trying to establish the planned outcome, looking at effect standards and all the other rules. Yeah, so I guess the point I'm just trying to make there is for some care to be taken around the way in which that particular reliefs from Kainga Ora is interspersed throughout the plan. But that's all I had.
Thank you. Any questions from the panel on any of those matters?
On,
Start with you, Kit. No,
not on those.
on something else?
Yes.
Go if you like.
One final matter that we might benefit from some legal advice on is something that came out of the airport submissions yesterday, and particularly whether they had scope to make a consequential change to sub-policy P14. And I think even Ms. Ongley perhaps considered that it was an open issue.
Okay.
And they certainly have scope to make change to the rule. But I won't give you the detail because I'm sure Ms. Lawrenson's over it. She'll be able to explain the issue, but just whether there is scope, to make change to the policy that they've recommended. And then Ms. Lawrenson can then talk about whether the rule change, if she supported it, how that fits without it. If there is a scope issue on the policy, how that rule change would work in the vacuum of not having a policy support.
Right.
Can I ask a clarification question just for that? So the noise contour reference that they seek in the policy is supported by a noise contour that's not currently in the plan.
The blue line,
But my understanding was that they've requested that as part of their submission on that, but that hasn't been supported in the joint witness conferencing between the planners.
Okay.
That's where the logic on it, as I understand it. You might need to check that.
yeah. The additional words that they seek to add into the policy is noise contour boundaries, I think, or something similar. I thought Mr. Edwards said that would reference only the 65 and 55, not the 50.
But they've asked for this other 50. But in this, I don't know whether you can recall, because you're on the noise hearing as well, but the boundary, that boundary was actually in the plan, but only on the area Q. So there's only a little portion of it on the area Q part of planning maps.
Okay. Yep.
But that relates to a other boundary that's in the operative plan, I think. Perhaps been superseded, but there's, and I'd hope that might have been worked its way through the joint witness statement between the planners on the airport noise issues, but it seems to still be at large.
And sorry, I did recall them saying that 50 didn't make it in, it
Yeah.
was still applied.
Yes. And the importance of the policy vacuum issue, Lauren, is that the rule that they're seeking is a non-compliant would have the effect of making, it's a reverse sensitivity type rule, right? Making it non-compliant, but without the benefit, without the obvious benefit of having a policy that supported that rule.
Right.
In the subdivision chapter, at least, you might have to go all the way up to the strategic objectives to find some sort of, well, not policy, but objective that that rule might be linked to.
Did their submission ask for and such other consequential relief as may be required?
I don't
I
know.
think there's only pointed to the frame of the submission actually covering the point adequately, but she couldn't give us, the actual words were not requested.
Yeah.
And they didn't prepare the submission either.
Oh, okay.
So clearly you can go back and look at the questions and answers
Yes.
from the summary on the Zoom tape.
From a planning perspective, and this is something Ms. Lawrenson might look at it, and Commissioner Littlejohn introduced the idea there may be some policies in the airport zone itself that provide the intermediary
Yes.
gap. So
And I think they were going to provide us with a piece.
They are.
To that,
there might be a sequence there.
So could I just clarify, would you like some legal submissions on whether or not the council considers there is scope?
Yes. And just to help, they were going to
That's the-
provide, yes,
That's the only
yes.
point.
But you might have some benefit from the information that Mr. Edwards is going to provide by tomorrow, I think.
By the end of the week, yes.
Yes, just tomorrow.
Saturday, the end of the week. End of the working week.
Ah, yes.
It's getting late, I know. Do we have any other questions? I'll exercise my right to ask Commissioner Littlejohn 2 points of clarification questions. Can you explain to me what you mean by the term a potential lacuna?
Look, my Latin master from New Plymouth Boys High School would be rolling in his grave if he thought that you didn't understand the word lacuna, Stephen. But it's a lacuna where something's not covered. That's what essentially what it means. So two things, like if you shine 2 lights in one place, but you end up with a shadow where the lights aren't, you'd call that a lacuna because there's no light there.
Thank you. I shouldn't have asked the question because it actually identifies my ignorance with Latin, but I love the words is in the way that lawyers use them. So
well, and look, lawyers study Latin simply that they can look smarter than everyone else. It's the only reason they do it, Stephen, and it's worked for centuries. So it doesn't actually mean we're smarter. It just means we happen to know some words that other people don't.
yeah, well, I love hearing them, and I always ask if I don't quite understand. So lawyers
Planners have their own Latin, Stephen. Don't worry.
yes, but lawyers have they're useful in this regard that you can explain Latin to us. So
Uses as well.
can I ask why? Of course you do. I'll bring you the can I ask my second question of clarification? What is butterfly wing effect?
How to describe that one? That is, I don't even know where it came from. I think it was Buddha, or it might have been from one of the Zen Taoist philosophies about the interconnection of the universe, such that a butterfly flapping its wings in Beijing causes a current that cascades through to a hurricane somewhere. So it's all about how one small little tinker might lead to quite dramatic changes because everything's connected.
Thank you for that. That's very much appreciated and a great assistance to us. Look, sorry to ask those. I thought it was just a bit of light relief at the end of Tane, could you close us with a karakia, because the hearing is completed, and we'd love you to close our hearing with the karakia. Thank you.
Kia ora mai tātou. Ko te tūmana ko, ka haumare tonu tātou. So the most important thing for us is to be safe this time of the taniwha of COVID. Engari, tō tātou karakia wakamutika tīrei. Rei, unuhia, unuhia. Unuhia i tūru tapu nui kia wātia kia mama tēnā koutou tīnana te wairui tara takatu. Ko ia rā e rongo, o ka eri aki ki rongo, kia wātia, ai rā kua wātia. Au, pai maari e. Ora koutou.
You're right.
Thank you all for today.
Farewell, everyone, and thank you for those listening in. We'll probably see you all again at some stage, I think. Thank
Yep.
you.
And I'll see you next week.